My most dangerous discovery wasn't about mental illness. It was about people who see what everyone else misses, and why that gift ends up destroying them. In my clinical practice, I documented a group of individuals with what I called differentiated perception. These people could read micro-expressions, sense hidden emotions, and pick up on psychological patterns invisible to almost everyone else. They could walk into a room and instantly feel who was lying, who was in pain, and who was hiding resentment. But this ability came with a cost. Every one of them ended up isolated, drained, and incapable of maintaining normal relationships. Not because they were unstable, but because seeing everything exacted a psychological toll that no one understood, the patient who changed everything. This discovery began with one particular patient. A deeply introverted, intuitive woman who came to me in 1913 during my own psychological crisis following my break with Freud. She would later represent what I considered the rarest personality type, possessing what I termed undifferentiated intuitive perception. She could enter any environment and instantly sense the emotional reality beneath the surface. Who was lying? Who was heartbroken? Who was quietly seething? I wrote in my private notes, "The patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her distress rather than advantage." She couldn't engage in small talk. She saw through every mask. She couldn't maintain friendships. People felt too exposed around her. And she couldn't hold a job. Her very presence disrupted the unspoken psychological agreements that keep groups functioning. I realized I wasn't treating a mental illness. I was witnessing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious. When perception grows so sharp that it becomes a danger to one's social survival. The phenomenon of participation mystique. This patient's case led me to investigate something I would later call participation mystique, a state where individuals with highly differentiated intuition become overwhelmed by the unconscious material of others. I noted during my Red Book period, there are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communication but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment. These were people whose minds acted like antennas for hidden emotion and repressed truth. Within my framework of psychological typology, I identified them as belonging to the introverted intuitive type, a tiny fraction of humanity. Such individuals don't just feel deeply. They perceive unconscious patterns with startling precision. They see the sadness behind forced smiles, the panic behind confidence, the collective shadow that everyone else agrees to ignore. The danger, I realized, lay not in perception itself, but in the isolation it creates. When someone sees truths others cannot or will not see, they become a mirror society cannot bear to look into, the problem of the superior function. I called this the problem of the superior function, when one's greatest strength becomes one's greatest burden. The person gifted with superior perception becomes alienated, their insights mistaken for judgment, their intuition dismissed as arrogance. But that wasn't the most dangerous part, because these perceptive individuals could see others' hidden content so clearly, they became targets for what I later described as shadow projection. People unconsciously attack those who reflect back the parts of themselves they cannot accept. In Psychology of the Unconscious, I wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent." I came to understand that this principle extended beyond the family, to all relationships. When someone's shadow is mirrored back to them by another person's clarity, the unconscious has only two options: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. The scapegoat pattern. I saw this pattern again and again in my clinical work. Those with differentiated perception became scapegoats in every group they joined. When they gently pointed out that someone seemed troubled, they were accused of being negative. When they named obvious problems, they were told they were creating drama. It wasn't coincidence. It was defense. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, I wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But for most people, it's easier to attack the person who exposes their shadow than to confront it. So the highly perceptive person becomes the group's designated problem, the lightning rod for collective denial, not because they cause issues, but because they reveal them. They become a repository for everything the group cannot face in itself. 4 Faces of the Introverted Intuitive. Over time, I identified 4 distinct patterns within the introverted intuitive type, each representing a different way of processing the unconscious contents of others. 1. The feeling intuitive. These individuals combine introverted intuition with a differentiated feeling function. They don't just understand what's happening, they feel it in their bodies. They absorb the emotions of others so completely that they lose track of what's their own. I wrote, "The feeling intuitive lives in a state of perpetual emotional contagion, experiencing the unlived emotions of everyone in their environment." 2. The thinking intuitive. They see psychological patterns like chess moves, predicting outcomes with eerie accuracy. They can sense relationship breakdowns, career collapses, or emotional crises long before they happen. Not through analysis, but through deep unconscious recognition. 3. The sensation intuitive. These people feel the physical manifestations of psychological states. They can detect illness before symptoms arise, sense fatigue before it's acknowledged, or feel bodily tension that signals distress. These individuals serve as early warning systems for psychological and physical disease, I noted. 4. The pure intuitive. The rarest kind. Their intuition operates without an organizing function. They perceive everything but struggle to express it coherently. They live in a constant flood of information with no filter to contain it. Each of these patterns presents a different version of the same challenge: how to integrate extraordinary perception without losing one's psychological footing. The dangers of seeing too much. I called this my most dangerous discovery because I saw how devastating unintegrated perception could be. I identified 3 specific dangers faced by those who see too clearly. 1. Collective unconscious disruption. The individual who perceives too much threatens the silent agreements that keep society functioning. Every family, group, and organization relies on shared illusions, mutual decisions about what not to see. The person who breaks that spell becomes a destabilizing force. 2. Psychological isolation. Superior perception creates existential loneliness. When your awareness outpaces the collective, you feel as if you live in another reality entirely. The curse of consciousness, I wrote, is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it. 3. Identity dissolution. Perhaps the greatest danger, those who constantly absorb others' unconscious material risk, losing contact with their own personality. Their psychological boundaries erode until they no longer know where they end and others begin. I called this participation mystique, the merging of individual identity with collective unconscious content. The danger isn't merely exile, it's annihilation. The loss of self in a sea of others' emotions and energies, the path of integration. Because these dangers were so profound, I developed a process for what I called individuation, the conscious integration of perception without losing one's identity. It unfolds in 3 essential phases. Phase 1, recognition and differentiation. I taught my perceptive patients to recognize when they were absorbing feelings or thoughts that didn't belong to them. They had to learn to discriminate between their authentic experience and the unconscious material they were picking up. The first task, I wrote, is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. I instructed them to spend time in solitude each day, to let the noise of absorbed material settle until their own inner voice became audible again. Phase 2. Shadow integration. Those who see others' shadows often struggle most with their own. The clearer your vision of other people's darkness, the more you must confront your own capacity for deception and cruelty. Everything that irritates us about others, I reminded them, can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. True integration comes when you can look at human imperfection, yours and others, without judgment. Phase 3. Conscious participation. Finally, I taught the art of conscious participation, engaging with the unconscious contents of others without being swallowed by them. An individuated person can serve as a bridge between consciousness and the unconscious, helping others see what they repress without losing their own center in the process. This requires what I called psychological containers, the ability to hold another's pain, tension, or confusion long enough to help make it conscious while remembering it's not yours to carry. The line between genius and madness, because superior perception could either destroy or transform a person. I began studying historical figures to understand why some broke down, while others achieved profound integration. The first was Friedrich Nietzsche. His insights into human nature were extraordinary. He saw through social, religious, and philosophical illusions with unmatched clarity. But instead of transforming that perception into wisdom, he became consumed by it. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, I wrote that Nietzsche's downfall came not from madness but from identification with his superior function. He mistook perception for truth itself. Rather than using his vision for healing, he wielded it as a weapon against the collective illusions of society. His isolation grew, and eventually his perception turned inward, devouring him. Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature, I observed, but he remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. His story was a warning. When perception expands faster than the capacity to integrate it, consciousness collapses under its own weight. Then came Meister Eckhart, the medieval mystic. He represented the other side of the spectrum, a model of successful integration. Eckhart also perceived realities invisible to others, but unlike Nietzsche, he transformed his vision into compassion. Eckhart didn't use his insights to judge, he used them to illuminate. He could see into the souls of others without condemnation, speaking truths that uplifted rather than shattered. Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others, I wrote. He saw clearly but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. The key difference between Nietzsche and Eckhart was humility. Eckhart saw his perception not as proof of superiority, but as a responsibility to bring consciousness to others gently, without force. My own descent and integration. My fascination with these figures was not academic, it was personal. Between 1913 and 1919, I endured what I called my confrontation with the unconscious, later recorded in the Red Book. I was haunted by visions, dreams, and inner voices. At times, I feared for my sanity. My perception of unconscious contents, both in myself and others, became so intense it threatened to engulf me completely. I was menaced by a psychosis, I wrote, and was saved only by my ability to understand what was happening to me through my work. The difference between my collapse and Nietzsche's was integration. I learned to stand between worlds, to witness unconscious material without identifying with it. My perception became a bridge, not a prison. I realized my visions weren't pathological. They were evolutionary. Consciousness itself was attempting to grow beyond its current limits, and I was simply the vessel. Once I understood that, everything changed. My work with perceptive patients took on a new purpose. I saw their pain as a stage in consciousness evolution, not as illness. The few who understand those who see too much rarely find people who can meet them without fear or defensiveness. So I began teaching what I called the recognition process, how to identify relationships that support integration rather than intensify alienation. I found 3 essential relationship types that could sustain the highly perceptive individual. 1. Fellow individuated persons. These are people who have gone through their own process of individuation. They recognize authenticity instantly. There's no need for pretense or defense, I wrote. The individuated person recognizes another individuated person immediately. There is a quality of presence that cannot be fabricated. Such connections are rare but vital. With them, you can be fully yourself without overwhelming the other person or being rejected for your depth. 2. Those engaged in their own inner work. Even if they haven't completed individuation, people committed to their own psychological development through therapy, introspection, or spiritual practice can meet you halfway. Those who have begun to know themselves, I wrote, can bear to be known by others. They understand the value of depth. They might not share your perception, but they won't fear it. 3. Natural containers. Some individuals have a remarkable stability of psyche. They don't necessarily possess superior perception, but they can hold space for it. They're grounded, mature, and unafraid of complexity. I called them natural containers, people whose presence absorbs without collapsing. They can listen to what's dark or difficult without losing themselves in it. How to recognize safe relationships to help perceptive individuals navigate social terrain. I developed markers for identifying those who could truly engage with them. Safe people. Ask genuine questions about your observations instead of reacting defensively. Admit contradictions and flaws without shame. Show curiosity about the inner world, not just surface events. Stay emotionally steady when faced with uncomfortable truths. Seek understanding over control. I also taught what I named the gradual revelation protocol. It's a simple but vital process for revealing your perceptive abilities safely. Start with small, gentle insights. Watch how the other person reacts, defensiveness or curiosity. Increase depth only if they show openness. Frame observations as offerings, not judgments. The goal isn't to find people who believe everything you see. It's to find people who can engage with your perception as valuable rather than threatening. The cultural purpose of integration. As I deepened this work, I came to believe that integrating superior perception wasn't just a personal matter. It was an evolutionary necessity. In the undiscovered self, I wrote, the individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about change in society. When people integrate their advanced perception consciously, they become what I called culture carriers, bridges between what is conscious in humanity and what is emerging. They see truths that the collective mind can't yet tolerate. Their role isn't to destroy society's illusions, but to prepare it for new levels of consciousness. This process unfolds in what I described as 4 stages of transformation. The 4 stages of transformation. Stage 1. Recognition without overwhelm. The first transformation occurs when the individual accepts their perceptive abilities without being crushed by them. It's the moment when you stop fearing your sensitivity and start naming it. The beginning of wisdom, I wrote, is the recognition of what one actually is, not what one wishes to be or fears to be. Stage 2. Integration without isolation. Next comes learning how to live among others without suppressing your perception. It's the art of social individuation, staying authentic while remaining connected. The individuated person doesn't retreat from the world. They engage it more deeply and compassionately. Stage 3. Service without sacrifice. When perception matures, it transforms from a burden into a gift. The individual begins to use their insight to help others, but with boundaries. They no longer bleed for others. They serve consciously. The privilege of a lifetime, I wrote, is to become who you truly are, and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole. Stage 4. Legacy without attachment. At the highest stage, perception becomes impersonal. You use your vision not for validation but to contribute to the evolution of consciousness itself. The individuated person works for the future, not for recognition. Integration becomes a form of cultural medicine. Consciousness pioneers. I began to see these individuals, the ones with dangerous perception, not as outcasts, but as pioneers of consciousness. They are humanity's early experiments in deeper awareness. The insights they carry are not mistakes or malfunctions. They are previews of where collective consciousness is heading. What is not brought to consciousness, I wrote, comes to us as fate. Perceptive individuals help bring what's unconscious in society into awareness before it erupts destructively. But I also saw the traps that could derail their transformation, preventing perception from becoming wisdom, the 4 great pitfalls. Because the integration of superior perception is fraught with danger, I identified the most common ways individuals lose their way. Pitfall 1, the inflation trap. When perception expands faster than humility, the ego begins to believe it's special, chosen, enlightened, superior. In 2 essays on analytical psychology, I warned that the danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships. This is the prophet complex, the belief that one's perception is divine truth, that others must be saved from their ignorance. It leads to preaching, judgment, and inevitable isolation. The moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, I wrote, one has fallen into unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand. Pitfall 2, the withdrawal justification. Some use their perception as a reason to retreat completely from society, telling themselves that others are too unconscious to be worth engaging. I called this spiritual superiority disguised as wisdom. True individuation doesn't require escape. It requires conscious participation. The hermit who withdraws from life, I wrote, has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it. Pitfall 3, the helper's hunger. Others swing to the opposite extreme. They become addicted to helping, defining themselves entirely through others' pain. They vanish behind the role of healer or empath. When perception becomes identity, I warned, the person disappears behind the function. This is not individuation, but its opposite, the sacrifice of personality to role. Pitfall 4, the overwhelm return. Even those who've achieved integration can relapse during times of trauma or stress. They lose their psychological boundaries and become flooded again with the unconscious material of others. Integration, I discovered, isn't a one-time victory, it's a lifelong dance. The art of maintaining integration. Because integration isn't permanent, I taught my patients what I called integration maintenance, a set of practices to keep their perception clear and grounded. The most essential practices were these. Regular solitude. Time alone is not optional, it's medicine. Solitude helps perceptive individuals separate what belongs to them from what they've unconsciously absorbed. It clears psychic residue and allows their authentic voice to re-emerge. Conscious engagement. Choose carefully when and with whom to use your perception. You are not meant to see everything, everywhere, all the time. Conscious engagement keeps perception from turning into compulsion. Ongoing shadow work. Constantly examine your own projections. The moment you believe you're beyond certain emotions, they'll return disguised in your perceptions of others. Reality-checking relationships. Stay connected with people who can hold a mirror without distortion. Those natural containers who ground you when perception begins to spiral into interpretation. Creative expression. Channel what you perceive into art, writing, or movement. Creativity turns overwhelming perception into meaning. It gives form to the formless, allowing the unconscious to speak safely. The integrated person, I wrote, does not achieve perfection but learns to dance consciously with their own psychological complexity. Integration, then, is not about silencing perception. It's about cultivating relationship with it. Superior perception and collective evolution. In time, I came to understand that individuals with superior perception serve a far greater purpose than personal insight. They are, in essence, forerunners of collective consciousness. Human evolution is not just biological, it is psychological. Consciousness expands one person at a time through those who can tolerate the tension of opposites, seeing both the light and the shadow of humanity without collapsing into either. In The Undiscovered Self, I wrote, the individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about change in society. Those who can see deeply and integrate what they see become instruments of evolution itself. Their insight ripples outward, reshaping the collective in subtle ways. I observed a pattern throughout history. What first appears as a psychological insight in an individual later manifests as a cultural transformation. For example, mystics once spoke of interconnectedness in spiritual terms. Centuries later, science began to describe it in quantum and ecological language. What was once mystical becomes mainstream. After enough consciousness carriers prepare the ground. What appears in the individual first, I wrote, later manifests in the collective as culture. Thus, the sensitive, intuitive individual is not a mistake of nature. They are the early laboratory of humanity's next form of awareness, service without martyrdom. One of the hardest lessons for perceptive individuals to learn is that service does not require suffering. I called this principle service without martyrdom. You do not serve consciousness by destroying yourself for it. The goal is to remain a bridge, not a burnt offering. When you collapse from empathy overload or psychic exhaustion, you can no longer be of use to anyone, not yourself, not others, not the collective. The individuated person serves the collective not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole. When perception is integrated, you don't force awareness onto others, you embody it. You live in such a way that your presence itself becomes clarifying. This is what I meant by the transcendent function. The ability to perceive deeply without attachment, to act consciously without compulsion, to hold truth lightly. The patient's transformation. Remember the woman who first revealed this dangerous discovery to me. The introverted intuitive who could see through every mask. After 3 years of work together, her transformation was remarkable. She learned to distinguish between her own inner material and the unconscious emotions she absorbed from others. She discovered that solitude wasn't isolation, but restoration. Eventually, she became a counselor, using her differentiated perception not as a curse, but as a gift to help others see themselves. Her relationships flourished with people who valued her insights rather than fearing them. Most importantly, she stopped trying to see less and learned to see more wisely. The patient learned not to see less, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift remained intact, but it was no longer devouring her. She had integrated what once threatened to destroy her. The two paths of superior perception. From that case, I concluded there are only two paths for those born with this heightened perception: destruction or transformation. Either the individual becomes overwhelmed, collapsing into isolation, confusion, or psychosis, or they learn to wield their perception consciously, turning it into an instrument of healing and evolution. The difference lies entirely in integration. When perception operates unconsciously, it becomes chaos. Too much input, too little structure. But when the same perception is integrated, it becomes wisdom, clarity without cruelty, awareness without overwhelm. This, I realized, was the true purpose of individuation, to transform dangerous awareness into conscious participation in the evolution of humanity, the psychological gift hidden in the curse. If you've ever felt like you see too much, know this. Your perception is not a malfunction. It's an advanced feature of consciousness still in beta testing. You are not broken because you sense what others miss. You are simply ahead of your time. The question isn't whether you should dim your perception to fit into collective unconsciousness. The question is whether you'll develop the strength and structure to integrate it. Because perception without integration destroys, but perception with integration transforms. The world needs conscious seers. The world doesn't need fewer perceptive people. It needs integrated perceptive people. Those who can hold awareness without judgment, truth without superiority, empathy without collapse. Your task is not to hide your vision, but to learn how to use it consciously. To move from reaction to response, from suffering to service. When you do this, your perception becomes medicine. For you, for those around you, and for the collective. You stop reflecting people's shadows unconsciously and begin illuminating them consciously. You no longer absorb the pain of others, you help them see it. This is the alchemy of awareness, turning perception into transformation. Consciousness pioneers in the future of mind. I came to see that individuals with superior perception are not anomalies. They are the next evolutionary step. Humanity develops consciousness first. Through individuals, then through cultures. Each time a single person learns to integrate what others can't yet see, the collective psyche takes a small but irreversible leap forward. The world will ask you who you are, I wrote, and if you do not know, the world will tell you. Highly perceptive individuals know too much of what the world denies. Their mission is to stay conscious enough not to be consumed by what they perceive. You are not too sensitive. You are the frontier of human consciousness learning to see itself. The ultimate integration. At the highest stage of individuation, perception and peace coexist. You see everything, lies, pain, shadow, brilliance, and you remain steady. You no longer try to fix everything you perceive. You trust that awareness itself is the beginning of healing. You stop demanding that others understand you and instead become the understanding presence they unconsciously crave. That is the final evolution of dangerous perception. It ceases to wound and begins to heal. The closing revelation. My most dangerous discovery wasn't that some people see everything. It was that most of them never learn to use what they see wisely. The danger isn't in the perception. It's in the unconscious relationship to it. When perception is unintegrated, it isolates. When it's integrated, it awakens. You were not born to be blinded by what you see. You were born to illuminate the unseen, first in yourself, then in others, and eventually in the world. The world doesn't need you to see less. It needs you to see consciously. Because when those who see everything learn to wield that sight with humility, patience, and wisdom, they become not the victims of perception, but the architects of consciousness evolution itself.